Dear friends, to start, I must mention that SGLT2I, SGLT2 inhibitors today have been hailed as a game changer because of its anti-diabetic properties, anti-atherosclerotic properties, anti-heart failure properties, its renoprotective properties, and myriads that also Madam described, anti-lipid, etc., etc. It has been hailed as a game changer, which we have called today as the molecule of the decade. And you know, it's a new molecule. It was introduced in 2013, both Kana and DAPA in 2013, and came EMPA in 2014. We have few others in the pipeline. We have Remo, we have many others which are in the pipeline. But in our country, these three, DAPA, Kana, EMPA, and to certain extent Remo, are the existing glyphosate in our country. And we'll be confining our discussion today mostly to these molecules. Dear friends, I must say from the rooftop that this has been a great tool in the armamentarium of diabetes management. And people now say whether this drug belongs to Shashank, to Chandorkar, or to Vishwanath, meaning thereby to whom the molecule belongs. It has multifarious activities, as you will see just now. So before I start further, I'll request my very close and dear friend Shashank to tell us what is the indications in his endocrine diabetes practice that he uses SGLT2. Shashank, was my question clear?
Sir, you are unmute, sir. You are.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Manjula. Professor Das, at the onset, I want to wish all of you all and all the people a very happy and healthy 2021. And I hope that we are going to discuss endocrinology, cardiology, nephrology, and not COVIDology. So I think that's the first
Good.
one. And SGLT2 inhibitors now have got a space everywhere, particularly DAPA. It is a space in endocrine practice. It definitely has a space in cardiac practice, and I'm sure Dr. Chandra will say it is his drug. And I'm sure my good friend Vishwanath will say, no, it's a completely nephrological drug because it only works on the kidney. So pure kidney drug, he'll say, pure kidney drug. So that is what he'll say. And then, COVIDologists will say that, DAPA has a trial also in COVID happening in cell therapy. So, it's everywhere. It's omnipresent.
Absolutely.
Diabetic.
Absolutely.
We are Asian Indians. So we are thin, fat Asian Indians.
Yes.
We get the disease a decade earlier.
Yes.
And we are actually coronary prone. We are both prone for coronary artery disease as well as heart failure. We are also renal prone because probably we have the highest renal burden in the world. Therefore, for cardiorenal protection, it's a drug to be used early. So I think where a change has come is from skepticism. Now, mind you, this whole pathway is more than 180 years old. From the tree barks of Florizin, if you see the history of SGLT2 inhibition, it has actually started 180 years old. And now, today, it is in prime time. If you look at the European Society of Cardiology, they say if the person is at very high cardiovascular risk, use SGLT2 inhibitor as the first line, not even metformin. Metformin, if it has to be relaunched now, I don't think it will, even get the class where it needs. So where has SGLT2 inhibitor started coming? In a pre-diabetic obese person with more than 2 cardiovascular risk factors, okay, with hypertension, diabetes, or a coronary artery disease, smoker, obese, even in a pre-diabetic, but that's off-label, one can use an SGLT2 inhibitor, especially if the person is obese, because you can get weight loss and we can get a pleiotropy of benefits. These are pleiotropic drugs. So what statins were to cardiologists and what ACE and ARB were to nephrologists, SGLT2 inhibitors are not only for endocrinologists, but they are also for cardiologists and nephrologists.
Absolutely. I think
you can use it, sir, is you can use it in early diabetes. Hit hard, hit early. Start ASAP with metformin SGLT2 as a combination. Not a bad idea. You can also start with the gliptin SGLT2 as a combination. Not a bad idea. So in the first decade of a diabetic's life, hit hard, hit early, you can use an SGLT2 inhibitor. Then later on also, you can still add an SGLT2 inhibitor as a second agent, third agent, fourth agent. And even if somebody on insulin, you can take it off. Only 2 caveats where not to use it. If you are a type 1 diabetic, you need extraordinary caution. Second, if somebody doesn't have adequate C-peptide on board, which means there is no insulin being produced by the body, and you are giving this agent, it will shave off the short-acting insulin. The basal insulin will be there, sugars will look normal, and the person will slip into a ketosis. So it's called as euglycemic diabetic ketoacidosis. Very, very rare. Only side effect is it can cause a little bit of mycotic fungal infections. That's the only about a little effect. Urosepsis is a debatable issue, but somebody has recurrent urosepsis, I would be cautious and careful using this drug. In senior citizens above the age 80, I will be a little careful using the drug and might use a little lower dose. Beyond that, I feel this drug has an edge step place. Query first line, okay, or in pre-diabetes, question mark, because evidence, level A evidence is still awaited, but it will come. Second line, absolutely there. Okay. Third, fourth line, it's very much there. So SGLT2 inhibitors have arrived and they are right up on the pecking order of all of us. And they are clearly, I would say, the drugs of the last decade, which have now entered in the next decade.
Thank you, Shashank. I think beautifully you have said that this is a wonder drug which can be used, must be used early, hit hard, and hit it all. And number two, it can be used in singly or in combination. You have rightly described with metformin or with the gliptin combination. You have also said it can be also used in a patient. Since we Indians are very prone to cardiac disease, heart disease, you have told about the proneness to atherosclerosis, heart failure, and not the plethora of the cardiovascular risk factors, where this drug has an edge over the others. And you also said in various stages of the disease, it can be used. Fantastic answer, Shashank. Thank you very much. Now
I had one slide. You want me to show it now, or you'll allow me to show it later?
We'll do it later. We have time.
No,
now, Dr. Chandorkar, can I come back to you to say that I'll twist the question a little bit. What are the scenarios or what are the things that you look for in a patient of a cardiac patient where you like to use SGLT2? Maybe with diabetes, focus. Without diabetes, beyond the focus. Is my point clear, Chandorkar? What
yes,
sir. Look at
definitely. Basically, it's not diabetes alone. And that's the beauty of the molecule which attracts me, because after DAPA-HF came in, it opened everyone's eyes. More than half of the patients in DAPA-HF were non-diabetic. And we had virtually the same magnitude of protection and event reduction as in diabetic people. So we are looking at a class of molecule, and now we have hard evidence on two molecules, EMPA and DAPA, for pretty much the similar indication, even in non-diabetic people, and showing great results. So to me, now it is back to the bench, and we have to see exactly how is it that they're working, and why is it that we are getting so much benefit in non-diabetic people. So that's a very, very attractive proposition. And given the fact that our pharma industry has brought down the prices to this level, I suspect in some time we will be using this as a low-cost ARNI substitute. It's too early, but it's going to happen because of the cost benefit and because of the proven event rate reduction. So let's see how it happens, how it pans out.
Thank you. I think very, very focused answer. I think doctor has said that is a wonder drug, and this drug can be used in both. We'll come to the discussion a little later, but I think he has opened up the very huge aspect of it to be used not only in diabetics, but beyond diabetes. I'll come back to Dr. Vishwanath. Vishwanath, I mean, what are your take on using this drug in the kidney disease, chronic kidney disease, with or without diabetes? Vishwanath, please.
Yes, sir. As Dr. Shashank mentioned, see, after the invent of ACE and ARB, there was no wonder drug in nephrology, more than 2 decades. Now we have this drug which has shown effects on the kidney beyond ACE and ARB. So definitely I would be happy to use any drug which prevents or protects from worsening of CKD. As we all know, once CKD onset happens, whatever we do, many times we will not be able to halt the progression. Any drug which helps us in preventing further damage or preventing further progression, definitely we would be happy to use. And in fact, in the DAPA CKD trial, they have seen the benefit was beyond even diabetes. So definitely non-diabetic patients also, if there is a benefit, we would love to use it.
I think great answer. And the DAPA CKD trial, as you rightly said, Vishwanath, has shown both in the diabetic kidney disease and non-diabetic kidney disease. It has shown to give three benefits. The benefit, as you rightly said, is delaying the EGFR deterioration, in giving renal protection, and also preventing, as you say, Chandorkar and Sasank is the author of this term, that on a chronic kidney disease, heart attacks occur. Am I correct, Chandorkar ji?
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
so that it also prevents. So as you rightly, Mr. Nath, you hit the bullseye by saying that it prevents progression of the EGFR becoming worse and worse. They used for the patient DAPA kidney at about 70 ml, and it prevented going downhill compared to the people who are on placebo. Number two, it also prevented ESRD and kidney death. It also prevented the heart attacks which can occur. Wonderful answer. Wonderful answer. I have a question now for Dr. Chandorkar. It's a very, very thoughtful question. Dr. Saab, I would like to know that the indications written in our guideline, which Sasank is going to highlight in a minute, that we said sometime back about 2019 beginning, that if somebody, a diabetic who has got atherosclerotic heart disease proneness or atherosclerotic heart disease factors, give X. If somebody has heart failure, give Y. I would like to know from you, sir, how do you place this drug, SGLT2 inhibitors, in the atherosclerotic heart disease, which is a very big problem for us?
See, unfortunately, if you look at the diabetic people, for sure you would be giving an SGLT2 inhibitor. With non-diabetic atherosclerotic coronary artery disease, with systolic dysfunction, you'd still be on strong grounds to use it. There are lots of studies going on in HFpEF, which means heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, trying to use and harness the power of this molecule, and some very exciting data is emerging. So it's not when to use it, but why not to use it? And that is really where we stand. We should be trying to see whether we can use it, give all the safety guidelines to our patients, educate them about how to use it safely. But I'm sure this is going to turn out to be a very, very useful molecule in times to come. No question about it.
Thank you. I think beautifully that it works against the atherosclerosis per se, and the risk factors, coronary risk factors, which reduce atherosclerosis, be it blood pressure, be it etc., be it lipids, so as Manjula madam said, and so many things. So it is definitely a drug for the atherosclerotic heart disease, which I say ingrained. I use the new phrase ingrained in diabetes. Am I correct, Sasank? Am I correct, Chandorkar ji? That
Yes,
the atherosclerosis is ingrained in diabetes, so it's a wonder drug from that point of view. And we'll come back to the heart failure. Dr. Chandorkar has touched upon it. We'll come back to it. Now, I have a little bit of probing question to Sasank. Sasank did answer the question in his own way, but this probing question is that, Sasank, how often do you use SGLT2 inhibitor at the diagnosis of a type 2 diabetes with ASCVD, without ASCVD?
So I don't make a classification at
without
clinic of ASCVD or not ASCVD. I don't think that is the approach I use. I think if I see an obese individual who's asymptomatic with a very high cardiovascular risk, which means more than 2 cardiovascular risk factors, obese, I have a compelling reason that in my first line therapy or my second line therapy, SGLT2 inhibitor is right off on the pecking order. As I said, I am using it off label even in pre-diabetics.
Yes.
So I will give you an example. Yesterday I saw a patient, and yesterday was the first day of the year.
Yes.
He is a 48-year-old executive in a bank at a very senior position. Okay. And has been a hypertensive for the last 4 years. Smoking almost 2 packs of cigarette every day. Has a very strong family history of coronary artery disease. Has 2 premature coronary artery deaths in the family. Okay. Has walked into my clinic first time virtually. Okay. Not living in SimCity of Mumbai, with a fasting blood glucose of 184, post lunch of 264, ketones are negative, A1C is 8.8. Okay. And I started this patient on a DAPA-MET combination, and I don't think I have any hesitancy in starting it. And I also added a small dose of gliptin. So virtually I started him on a triple combination. And I have reasonable ground to say that I will definitely, I have counseled the patient for nutritional counseling, for giving up smoking, but at least I have some cardiorenal protection. I call it simply that if you use that diagnosis, it will offload the heart and offload the kidneys. It's an offloading drug. See, the atherosclerotic vascular disease and the impact of these drugs on the 3-point, 4-point MACE is not as robust as it is on heart failure offloading.
Absolutely.
As Dr. Chandorkar rightfully said, in absence of systolic dysfunction,
Yes.
if preserved EF data is awaited, 2021 is going to be for that data, for all molecules in that class. And we will have that data by the time year ends. Corona may end or not, this answer will be answered. But I am reasonably certain that we are very clear that for that particular patient, clearly DAPA-MET is a logical combination. If you go to Europe, it's already in the guideline. If you go to United States, it's almost there in the guideline. Even if you see the ADA 2021 guideline, it is already there. Okay. And I think RSHD has also put it in its wheel now.
Yeah.
So this is a compelling reason. So I don't see a choice. But even if somebody doesn't have documented atherosclerotic vascular disease, and I have a high cardiometabolic or cardiorenal patient, I think I am reasonably convinced that we should use these agents.
I think you are.
See, we are having a twin epidemic of hypertension diabetes. And in the twin epidemic of hypertension diabetes, I think SGLT2 inhibitors on the pecking order are very much on the top now. Because see, they are the only agents which have data on renal outcomes and cardiac outcomes. Can you, Dr. Das, I'm asking you the question in reverse.
Yes, yes.
Tell me any other class of agents
No,
which have that type of data.
no, absolutely.
Of GLP-1.
It's
And
a-
GLP-1 also, the data is heterogeneous.
Yeah.
For the same molecule, you can have two types of data. Like take an example, oral semaglutide versus injectable semaglutide,
yes.
liraglutide. But the same thing for another GLP-1 agent has not happened. For example, if you take another GLP-1, they are cardiovascular safe, but not protective, not preventive in all cases. SGLT2 inhibitors are consistent in their impact on the heart and kidney, and they are robust in their evidence. And that is why my predilection towards them is not because of fondness for company or company B, but because the data talks.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely correct. Even if GLP-1 has some data on the heart failure, it has to be injectable till semaglutide comes to the market, and it's going to be possibly very difficult to be available easily. So I fully agree with you that SGLT2 inhibitors are in the top of the world today, and it can be prescribed early on in the disease. I just wanted to have your comment on you touched upon the European Cardiology Society guideline, where they put SGLT2 before the metformin. You must have seen that. And there was a little bit of, you told about the combination. I would like to have Chandorkar first, then I'll come back to you. Chandorkar sir.
I know that you have French bias.
Let me,
Bias.
you will have the final word.
Yeah.
Sasak will have the final word.
Yeah, yeah.
Chandorkar ji, there was a little bit of, I don't say resentment, debate between whether you should give only SGLT2 first as per the European Cardiac Society recommendation, or you will give metformin and add SGLT2, or give the combination of SGLT2 and metformin, which is rampant in the market today. Very, very brief 1 or 2 line answer.
This is like asking Sachin Tendulkar to open the bowling when there are big bowlers around. With Shashank Joshi there and you there, you are asking me to answer this question is very, very unfair. Basically, from a cardiology perspective, I am excited about this group of molecules because the heart benefit it gives even in the absence of diabetes. And that's the reason I am here on this webinar today, because it's diabetes, beyond diabetes, I get protection. And that is the glue to which I'm attracted.
Very good. I think that's a very correct answer. Sasank, I'll not go to you because you have already answered that question. I have got very, very probing question to Dr. Chandorkar. Doctor, this is a very simple question somebody asked me, so I put it in it. And, do you use this molecule post-operative CVD patients?
If there is systolic dysfunction, yes. If there is any impaired glucose tolerance, diabetes, yes. And if there is not so bad renal function, then we definitely use it.
Okay.
The reason I'm talking about renal dysfunction is these days a lot of surgeons are doing a lot of OPCAB, or beating heart surgery, and there is a little bump in the creatinine for the first 2 or 3 days. So we are careful there. But apart from that, if the person comes with normal renal function, has a little systolic dysfunction, we do give it on day 1, day 2 also.
As a corollary, doctor, will you give it immediate post-op or will give it after some time?
See, if the patient went into the bypass surgery with a creat of 0.81, I would have no problem, and there was systolic dysfunction, I would have no problems giving it on day one.
Okay, okay, fine. I'll come back to Dr. Vishwanath. Vishwanath is a very important question. You know, as we have been discussing, if a patient has got 1 or 2 incidents of UTI, it can be lower UTI, it can be upper UTI, not a frank urosepsis. Now you find that the patient has had the past history of this UTI once or maybe maximum twice. Now, because of the diabetes, the patient has developed DKD. Maybe in this stage, I mean, maybe in the Borgensen's classification, stage 3 having albuminuria, or maybe having up to stage 4 with the eGFR of about 40-45. Would you like to use the SGLT2 or not? This is not a little difficult, loaded question, clinical scenario.
Yes,
I'll repeat again. A female patient has UTI once, had UTI again. It was completely treated. In the course of time, because of diabetes, developed diabetic kidney disease, and he is in the stages between 3 and 4. Would you use SGLT2 inhibitor?
Hope it's not a trick question, sir.
Yeah.
So hope it's not a trick question.
No, it's a clinical scenario.
Yes,
so
yes.
You've given the answer.
Many times we do see in our clinic.
To give his comments, yes.
Absolutely. Many times we do see in our practice and dilemma whether to use or not. And we would be a little more cautious on using on somebody who has had history of recurrent urinary tract infection.
Correct. Recurrent is correct. But
if somebody had very poorly controlled sugars, has anatomical abnormality of the bladder, if there is a bladder outlet obstruction, if there is any risk for developing recurrent urinary tract infection, we would be a little skeptical of using SGLT2 inhibitor. If there is no such abnormality, it was a very simple infection, definitely we won't hesitate to use. But even if we use, we would definitely warn the patient and family to look for any signs of infection. If there is any signs of infection, to get into medical attention immediately. Especially if somebody who is obese, who has a lot of volume overload, definitely SGLT2 we would prefer. And as we all know, any diabetic has a glucose coupled volume absorption, what we call as, which SGLT2 counters. So definitely it helps in prevention of volume overload, heart failure, and renal protection. So we would love to use it with caution. So if somebody has recurrent UTI, no. If somebody is on immunosuppressive medication, we would be definitely worried to use it. If somebody is on immunosuppression, any SLE or a transplant patient, we would be a little more cautious on using. If it is not there, if it is a simple infection, we can definitely use with caution.
I think you've given the absolutely fabulous answer. I'll not be going back to Sasank again, but I will repeat 2 points which Sasank said. He showed about the offloading. Chandorkar and Vishwanath, Sasank knows this term. I also call SGLT2 inhibitors the nutrition offloader. Like with diabetic food we offload, it also takes away the extra weight that the person puts on by eating extra food. As Sasank said about the atherosclerotic offloader, the heart failure offloader, and it's also nutrition offloader, which also was told by Vishwanath. And second thing, taking cue from what Dr. Chandorkar and Sasank both have said, you know, diabetes itself is a heart disease equivalent. In 2004, AHA said from the rooftop, diabetes is a heart disease. Therefore, I find no reason why this drug cannot be used in the beginning. And we're using in combination metformin, the benefits are myriads. I'll pass on to 3 odd questions now, which I will request you to give the answer. You know, we have got mainly three SGLT2 inhibitors in our armamentarium today: DAPA, EMPA, and CANA. Not in that order. I'm not putting the order in your mouth, sir. I would like to know from Dr. Chandorkar, which SGLT2 has an edge over others in the heart failure?
I think it's going to be DAPA and EMPA because these two have very solid evidence favoring one another. Use of either. The patient subsets in DAPA-HF and EMPA are a little different, but that is a function of the time in which the trial was carried out and the enrollment characteristics changed. but that's about all. Whether it's a class effect which can be extended to other molecules, I don't know. At the moment, I have solid evidence for two, so I will stick to those two.
Yeah, I think the class effect was not borne out in the last ADA when ertugriflozin was present. Remember, Doctor, ertugriflozin did not stand out to be.
Did not work out. Yes.
I will now ask you again, which is the one which is good as an ACE in ASCVD between the three?
You're asking me? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
I'd probably go for DAPA first or EMPA. That's about all. Because these two we have had the longest experience with, in our patients. And since the data started emerging, we started using more and more and more. And we're very happy using it.
Vishwanath, I have a question for you. Which SGLT2 inhibitor in your mind has an edge in CKD, has advantage in CKD?
Both DAPA and EMPA, and definitely, as we all know, CKD patients are on multiple medications. Cost of treatment is much higher. So in India, definitely we would prefer whichever is little cheaper molecule. So probably, I think you know the best which drug is cheaper.
Yeah, DAPA CKD and Emperor Kidney, both the trials have shown, and DAPA CKD, as all of you know, up to 2.4 years, it was abandoned because of the benefits were great. But it's also there. It is also there that the Credence has given some benefit of Kana to this molecule in this CKD. So as you rightly said, DAPA has given a great benefit. I think it is 21 and 19. If you did NNT, the number needed to 21 for the heart failure, 19 for the CVD, and similarly the data is very robust to show that the mortality, the progressive ESRD was much less in DAPA. CKD also has some, and Emperor Kidney also has shown. So that is to everybody's choice. Now, I would like to ask Shashank a very loaded question. Shashank, anti-diabetic drugs, as you teach everybody in the country, works much better in a sub-maximal dose. Do you think that what's your take on the clinical positioning of DAPA 5 milligram? If Shashank is not very happy, supposing tomorrow morning he gets a molecule, people will make it half. But what is your take, evidence-based take on the DAPA 5 milligram?
Evidence-based is based on what evidence is generated on. So I don't think I'll go for the sub-maximal doses based on hearsay evidence or anecdotal evidence. We are hard scientists in evidence base.
So you will bet 10 milligram.
So if Sheshgiri has been so kind to reduce the cost, use it in the appropriate dose. If you have an adverse event, then you can drop the dose by half. But not using the correct dose, I don't think is appropriate, because if the evidence base was generated at 10 milligram and now we are trying to cut a corner even for that, I don't think that's fair.
Okay. I have got, yes,
honest here.
I agree with you.
I know you may not like my answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the answer. Only my question to you, how do you approach DAPA 5?
We have to see whether evidence is generated. And evidence is generated at a particular dose. People spend a lot. See, also, second thing I want to tell you, that the first SGLT2 inhibitor on planet Earth was DAPA. It was deferred and delayed because it went through a strict pharmacovigilance. And therefore, it is the most studied drug in the anti-diabetic space on planet Earth. And that is why we are seeing a delayed stream of evidence now, which has emerged for DAPA, because it was the first to be discovered, launched a little later. Accidentally, EMPA got a lot of good work because of EMPA-REG. And Cana is also there, but it had some adverse issues. By and large, DAPA is reasonable. Used it in the best dose. Half the dose, you see a challenge with the full dose. But just because everybody is not like me in India. Okay, I may be half ticket, but others are full tickets.
That Shashank, I think your answer is very pertinent, and you have given.
Can I just add something here, please? Yeah. Basically, as a cardiologist, I see the application in heart failure, and all the heart failure drugs thus far, from carvedilol and other beta blockers, ARNI, we are on the side of giving the highest tolerated dose. Okay. Definitely, if you look at it like that, we always ramp up doses. So no question about a cardiologist giving 5, we'll go to 10. If ever data emerges on a higher dose, believe me, we'll go to the higher dose.
Yeah, I think you are correct. The question I stem for two reasons. number one, Dr. Chandrakar and Sasank knows it. You know, we had, when the drug was very expensive, we had some preparations which were with DAPA 5 and metformin 1000. You know, see the cleverness of making metformin 1000. And EMPA also made half of the usual doses, and they made also metformin 1000. And this drug was rampantly used. Of course, DAPA 10 and metformin 500, metformin 1000 is almost available, also available. So the question stems from that particular application which we had in DCGI, and it was approved that time. Of course, we had told them to come back after the post-marketing study. But now, as I personally see, it's a very affordable drug. I think there is no reason why you should not use a full drug, and it is possibly not much to cut corner about. I have one question to ask you, Dr. Chandrakar, which is very, very significant. It's a comparative evaluation. You have to give an answer. Don't escape the answer. We have got statins, which are held as having cut down the heart attacks in a common man's term by 33%. You have, and all these drugs were also used with the background of what drugs they were already on for the heart failure. Am I correct, Chandrakar sir? So
Yes.
all the trials, they were already continued on the background of whatever drug already taking. So I personally feel, should there be any comparative evaluation of statins versus SGLT2 inhibitors?
It is a very intriguing question. The only problem now is how will we ever design a trial where we are giving half of the patients statins and half of the patients no statins? And if it is a 2 by 2 factorial, then SGLT2 for another half. It's going to be very tough. So I don't think we'll ever, at this moment in time, take off the statin totally. I think we can have statin plus SGLT2, statin plus placebo. That would be a good comparison. I don't think we are in a position where we will ever take away the statin and just give SGLT2. But that's a very intriguing thought later.
Yeah, I think you have answered it hard. I will say, I mean, you are a gentleman. I am not. I'll say, Chandrakar, no. It has to be given on the background of statins to reap the benefit. As Sasank said, give the full dose to reap the benefits.
Yeah.
Now, I have a another intricate question, which is also in the chat box for me. Now, this is a very, very important question. Maybe I'll start with Sasank, but Sasank, I want only 2-line answer. Sorry for putting you a little bit of constraint. What is your take of putting straight away on triple combination? That is the SGLT2 plus metformin plus gliptin. Sasank.
I'm sorry.
I mean, what's your take on putting the triple drug combination to start with, like SGLT2 plus METF plus gliptin?
I already said that in the beginning.
So, I mean, how
For the patient I saw yesterday.
so you agree with this
I
combination?
firmly believe in it. But I have something else. Sheshgiri, can you show that slide which I showed?
Yes, sir. We are putting it up.
Yeah. I just wanted to show one slide.
Yes, please, Sasank.
Directions
Yep.
have shifted,
We have-
not just in endocrinology.
Yeah.
Triple drug in endocrinology is a done thing. But look at, this is a slide which is in a cardiology journal, which I'm sure Dr. Chandrakar will be excited,
Yes.
and I got the full text of this article. The conventional sequencing was ACE-ARB, beta blocker, mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist, neprilysin inhibitor, SGLT2 inhibitor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Look at the new sequencing now. This is offline just 2 days back. Step 1, beta blocker with SGLT2, then neprilysin inhibitor, then MRA. So, just close the slide. The way things have changed, whether it is cardiology, nephrology, you can remove the slide, Dr. Manjula.
You can take up the slide, Manjula.
Yeah, we'll remove the slides.
The way things have changed, SGLT2 inhibitors are everywhere. Whether it is a cardiology guideline, whether it is an endocrinology guideline, and whether it is a nephrology.
Mr. Venu, please stop sharing.
Okay, so that is things have changed. And these are standalone cardiology journals, standalone nephrology journals, and standalone endocrine journals. It is everywhere. And many of these slides are for non-diabetics. So look at the comparing evidence the molecule has generated.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
This is exactly what I was referring to, where I was saying this is going to be a threat to ARNI more than anything else. From a cardiology perspective, it's going to be a threat to ARNI. And that is precisely what is shown in the slide, that it comes in top with beta blocker and ARNI goes beyond that after that.
Yeah, I think there is there's a comment by one of our delegates, very important comment. He says that putting straight away to triple combination to a new diabetic or even a pre-diabetic will make the person a drug fan and following a proper diet exercise plan. But you see, we have got mantras which Shashank always says: eat less, walk more, be happy, and sleep well. So that will continue. That's the background. Everything else comes on this background. And also, I must tell you that Micro, I know from close quarters, they have that lifestyle. You say their own lifestyle. I'll tell you some other day. Now there's a question from very important that can DAPA be given to type 2 diabetes with CA breast, and can it be given post mastectomy more than 5 years, not on any chemotherapy? Basically, type 2 diabetic, post mastectomy 5 years, and C is not on any chemotherapy. Questioner is Dr. Ishwar Prasad, so he wants to have an answer on this. Anybody in the panel? Otherwise, I'll give my answer. I think I don't see any contraindication for giving it. Maybe you may add metformin, which has shown some benefit in some cancers, including breast, prostate, etc. And I think that's a good question that has been asked. Now I have got another question of Surinder Gupta from Ludhiana, who is not obsessed. He is very ambitious to see a diabetes-free world, and he says that how often, of course, UTI we have discussed by Dr. Vishwanath, how often hypoxia affect our therapy plan with SGLT2 inhibitors. Dr. Chandurkar, does hypoxia becomes a barrier? I don't think so. It does not take up. I mean, it's not a feature. I have a question for Dr. Vishwanath. Dr. Vishwanath, I just want to ask you that we say that this is a drug for the pump, there's the heart, for the pipes, that the vessels with the atherosclerosis, and we say for the filter, that is your area, Dr. Vishwanath.
Yes, sir.
So for the pump, pipe, and the filter. So this drug works in all the 3 arenas.
Yes,
Now,
sir.
coming back to the filter, till what eGFR you can use, let's say DAPA, do you use for DAPA?
In fact, if you look at DAPA CKD trial, they have used even at very lesser GFRs.
Yes.
So when we start initially DAPA, there may be a little drop in GFR, like something similar to what happens with ACE inhibitors.
Yes.
But if there is no significant drop and later they have seen on the long term, there is definitely protection. So there is no one cutoff at which people have used. Initially, when they started off with other SGLT2s, they had stopped at 30 ml GFR. With DAPA CKD, in fact, they came much lower. So if somebody has volume overload, and as we all know, CVD and CKD is a complex. Anybody with proteinuria, anybody with diabetes are prone for CVDs and also CKDs. So even with GFR less than 30 ml, DAPA can be used, but we need to monitor GFR and other side effects.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. Vishwanath, I just had a chat with Dr. Burma, Subodh Burma from Canada, who is a lot of work in this field.
Absolutely.
Day for yesterday. And he said that it was not in the guideline, as you rightly said, Vishwanath, it was only 30. But some patients were included with a 15 eGFR also.
Yes.
And they also did show the benefit.
Definitely.
So up to 15, but it was exploratory. It was not a pre-planned. So as you said, 30, but people have also found it in 15, which has been great thing.
Benefit.
Shashank, you said about the obese patient thrice. What is the maximum weight loss you have found with SGLT2 inhibitors?
So easily it goes beyond 5 to 10%.
10%.
What is it?
5% weight loss benefits are so huge.
5 to 10% of weight loss. See, rather than actually talking on kilograms,
Yeah.
what is meaningful weight loss is more than 5%,
Yes.
up to 10%. And we easily get up to 10%. And that's very, very compelling. And it's not just the lean mass, it's the fat loss. The lean mass is preserved, there is
Yes.
fat loss, and that is very compelling. And that's why the data is overwhelming.
Yes.
So I think these are the ideal drugs for diabetes, which is a very Indian germane problem. So for the thin fat Indians, I think it causes the fat loss without compromising the lean body mass. And that's very true about this agent.
I think great answer. Sasank, you know, you were one of the authors in one of the Micro Knowledge Academy books. We brought out an issue on diabetes. I don't have a hat, but my hat's off to my teacher, Professor B.M. Jairam, who termed it diabetes. And I'm very happy, Sasank, when you use that term also. And so it's a wonderful drug. Just to complete the answer, how much weight loss you have found in Dr. Chandrakar in your practice?
10%. 10% of the basal weight. 10%.
And Dr. Vishwanath?
Yes, sir. Similar. Most
Similar
of them
to
5 to 10%.
Fantastic.
10%.
Now I've got few questions to ask you. What is a very, very personalized questions? Out of so many studies that we have today, there's no alphabet is left. You know, you discuss about the heart failure, HFRF, you discuss about HFPF, you discussed about this various trials with the lipids in relation to DAPA and the heart failure. No alphabet is left. But I would like to know, because, you know, it's very important to know that, you know, when we using a molecule which has got many other avatars, I don't say competitors, say avatars, many other avatars from different companies. Out of the many studies, many data has been generated from various studies. Which of the study, Dr. Chandrakar, has influenced you? I told a personal question. Influenced you maximum among the SGLT2 studies?
DAPA-HF.
Okay.
Absolutely. Without doubt.
DAPA-HF, without doubt. I like to have Vishwanath now. Which of the study which has made you most influence on you out of all the studies? I'll give the names. DAPA-CKD, I'll give Canvas. Declare Timmy did not address that issue that much, but these two, which has influenced you maximum?
Obviously, DAPA-CKD, sir. In
DAPA-CKD.
fact, even lower GFR, they found
yeah,
benefit.
yeah.
And,
And
in
also
fact, they had to halt the trial. They had to halt the trial because benefit was so much.
So much. So it was a great trial which has to be locked.
Absolutely.
Now I would like to have one very simple question to ask, which is a very practical one. What are the things that you advise to your patient, Sasank, while prescribing SGLT2 inhibitors that he or she should follow? Apart from the prescription, what else you advise, Sasank, for your patient to follow?
I think every patient who's on SGLT2 inhibitor needs careful titration of their hydration.
Absolutely. Hydration is very paramount importance.
People have fluid in cardiac situations, so there you need to be extraordinarily careful. Second thing is, I always warn them that if they are on multiple antihypertensive or heart failure drugs or cardiac medications, often you need to have the low dose. That's where you are cutting off half of dose. So suppose you have a patient on ARNI already with me.
Yeah.
I'll have half of ARNI dose and half of DAPA dose. It makes a lot of common sense. So you need a lot of careful titration when you are having multiple comorbidities, like a cardio-renal situation, which can also be coming together at times. So there you need caution and exercise. So hydration is one issue. Second is, if the patient is on insulin like basal bolus, then you need to be extraordinarily cautious about the so-called euglycemic ketoacidosis. So very rare, very, very rare. Third is UTI and mycotic infections. Definitely need some redressal and addressal. We need a lot of reassurance there many a times. With mycotic infections, often we are able to restart the drug again. So that is the other thing which we need to do. And when there is extreme harsh climatic conditions, particularly where humidity or the temperature goes up, these agents do worse, or the adverse events of these agents are worse in summers and in humid environments. That's some simple observation over the last couple of years which we have been using this agent. So these are some simple take-home points.
I think very important. It's not simple, but I think what you said, hydration, you said about the comorbid conditions, you said about careful to the details of the other drugs that the patient is taking. Sasank, I have one question, which is a very silly question. You take me as a person who has started diabetes practice yesterday. I mean, is there a chance, like Anup wrote in the beginning, I can make a mistake in selecting the proper patient for SGLT2? You know what I'm meaning? Do you think that I can make a mistake, and how to safeguard against that mistake?
So if somebody's BMI is below 19, I would probably not give them an SGLT2 inhibitor at the beginning.
Exactly.
Because a very lean patient, if I give a SGLT2 inhibitor below 19, and that you can see in India, a BMI between 20 and 23 also will have some amount of fat.
Yeah.
But the response may not be the optimist. And I will not give an SGLT2 with metformin because both will shrink the patient. I don't want to shrink the patient. Between 23 and 25, between MET and SGLT2, my preference would probably be for SGLT2 inhibitor.
Yeah.
About 25 BMI, we are good to go.
Yeah.
So I think we'll have a simple BMI matrix on which you can actually decide how to handle these agents. Below 20,
very brilliant answer. I think
the Pride team of Sheshagiri will be very happy with BMI above 90.
Yes. I think, my dear friends in the audience, I just brought this question, which is a very preliminary question, but for few people who may not be aware that in the beginning, there are 1 or 2 mistakes where the drug was used in what we call latent autoimmune diabetes, who are type 1 and masquerading as type 2, or they did not have any insulin reserve. So they had gone into euglycemic ketosis, but no accidents did happen. So there is if somebody's BMI is 17, not difficult to find in India. The patient doesn't have a positive family history, which is always there in type 2 diabetes. If the patient's inaugural blood glucose is extremely high and does not respond to other oral hypoglycemic agents, these are the signals you might be dealing with a type 1 masquerading as type 2, and there possibly one has to avoid the drug. I just probed this question to get some answers from the experts. Now, I will come back again to Dr. Chandorkar and Dr. Vishwanath. Dr. Chandorkar, I just want to ask you that between the heart failure, which is HRF, reduced ejection fraction, and also there are some studies which has got the preserved ejection fraction. I'm referring to the studies which is in your fingertip. I'm referring to CVD Real. The Chandorkar, I'm referring to the CVD Real 1, CVD Real 2 studies, which both were produced from abroad in Canada. I mean, they had also used this drug in the heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. As Shashank said, DAPA preserved HF findings will be available this year. We don't know exactly when, but as an expert in the field, I would like to have your take on from the real CVD Real 1 and CVD Real 2 studies. What were the outcomes in the preserved ejection fraction heart failure?
So the trends are all very, very favorable. So there is definitely going to be greater usage of these molecules in the situations, even without the data coming out, we are using, but we are not on strong grounds to recommend as of yet. Yeah. If it is my patient, preserved ejection fraction, other syndrome like a heart failure, for sure, with Doppler criteria suggesting that there is heart failure incipient, I would use it. I won't be in a situation to tell everyone to do it as of yet, but I'm sure the data will emerge and the guidelines will show that we are going to be using this group much, much earlier in a much wider subset of patients. Definitely, no question about it. Just a matter of time.
I think that's exactly what I was hinting at, that even we have today evidences from the CVD Real 1 and 2 that it has got benefits in the preserved ejection fraction. Now, I have one question for Vishwanath. Vishwanath, how do you see the blood pressure salutary effects of the SGLT2 inhibitors in general and DAPA in particular?
In general, if you look at blood pressure control in CKD patients, as we all know, many times it is very difficult.
Yeah.
Most of the CKD patients are on minimum 3 or 4 antihypertensives, but still blood pressure is difficult to control. 90% of the patients' blood pressure is what we call as salt sensitive. Most of them will have blood pressure related to volume and salt, which are addressed by SGLT2 inhibitor. So definitely adding SGLT2 inhibitor, especially DAPA, will get down pressure related blood pressure, volume related blood pressure where BP will come under control. Many times we may be also able to take off few BP medications when we add SGLT2. And overall, their blood pressure comes down to previously, many times if you in your general practice see their blood pressures are usually between 150, 100, very difficult to bring it down to the recommended recommendation. So when we add SGLT2, volume is taken care of, salt is taken care of, definitely BP comes under much better control. We can also reduce the amount of medications we use.
Thank you. There are two questions in the chat box. So I will ask them to the panelists in general. What is the best time? The doctor is a chronobiology oriented physician. He wants to know what time of the day, what is the best time to administer SGLT2 inhibitors? Best time, morning, evening, night. Like we said, don't give last 6 Dr. Don't give furosemide after. I mean, we always give it. What we teach students, don't give after 6 p.m. Patient don't sleep. Like that, he's asking what is the best time to administer SGLT2 inhibitors? Chronological, I mean, from the chronobiology point of view, morning, evening.
I can attempt this question, but I don't think there is any such directive that these agents work better in the morning or evening or afternoon or night, because you see the biological clock is independent of, see, where are these molecules working? They are purely renal molecules. And because they are purely renal molecules, there is no renal clock. And Dr. Vishwanath can correct me.
Absolutely.
There's a biological clock inside the kidney. According to me, there is none. Because kidney is a 24/7 organ, if you ask. And for a 24/7 organ, and I am backed by two very eminent panelists. One is a cardiologist, where the heart clicks 24/7 and beats 24/7. And kidney also has to work 24/7.
Absolutely.
So they never have rest.
Yeah.
Okay, so for that, if you ask me by simple scientific logic, I don't think there is any basis. But as an endocrinologist, we have a cortisol rhythm, which is low and high at 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. And that can have an impact on the mineralocorticoid axis, can have an impact on the glucocorticoid axis, can have an impact on some of the renin-angiotensin pathways. But none of these pathways are impacting neither the SGLT2 mechanism in the kidney or on the heart. So if you ask me honestly, it doesn't matter. But sometimes there is a side effect of nocturia, which can be distressing for the patients. So purely out of convenience, I prefer to give the molecule in the morning rather than giving it at night. Usually they are once a day, and probably as more than 12 or 16 hours pass off, the incidence of nocturia comes down a little bit. This is my observation.
I think that is
but I would like Dr. Vishwanath, who's a nephrologist, and Dr. Chandorkar to give their comments. But these are pure observations. These are not given in any Goodman-Gilman's textbook of pharmacology.
Theoretically, definitely it has some diuretic effect. So probably I would prefer to use it in the daytime rather than in the late evening. And probably, as I said, physiologically also it makes more sense in probably using in the daytime.
Dr. Chandorkar?
I agree with what Shashank said, because it actually happened in a couple of patients. They took by mistake in the evening, although they were asked to take it in the morning, and they had both were adult males more than 65 years with a BPH, and they did not complain of any distressing nocturia. So I discovered it really makes no difference.
Correct. Thank you. I think with that note, we'll pass on this question. There's a question, again, a probing question to all of us. Now, the doctor who is asking the question has seen some physicians using antifungals in a person who has got repeated UTI, say fluconazole, while giving SGLT2 inhibitors. He is asking, is that a habit, a practice with me, Shashank, Chandorkar, and Vishwanath? I said, no, I don't use fluconazole and this combination. Neither Dr. Chandorkar. Shashank?
I think it's a very logical question. And I think if somebody has had a history of recurrent...
One can use, no harm. There's no interaction.
No harm.
Let me be very transparent here. I've used this drug off-label and I've used antifungals. Because you see, you need to understand that sometimes you will have a case where you want to use this agent and a mycotic infection cannot be a rate-limiting step for ease of use of the drug.
Yes.
In those situations, I have used it. But I don't have evidence to back me up. Let me be very transparent here that it is all anecdotal use, and individualized use on compassionate grounds is worth it. there is some suggestion to show that if there is a combination of a gliptin with an SGLT2 inhibitor, and it is not specific to any gliptin, used together, the gliptin may inhibit the DPP4 inside the fungi and the bacteria, and therefore there may be lesser incidence of fungal infections. I am not so sure I have seen that as a routine observation, but I am vigilant about it. So I might have some better data to publish in a few years. But I am certain that using it as a prophylactic in certain situations where I cannot take off the patient of that agent, I probably may have used it.
Yeah, I think that's a very
don't know what
genuine
my
answer.
might have
I think Sasank, you're correct.
But I will not use it. I will not start this agent with a co-prescription of antifungal. No.
That's my question. Yeah.
I think that's what you meant. That you have a compelling reason to use SGLT2 and infection is debarring you. There is no harm in using it together. I think the last question before we have just another. We have just exceeded by 1 minute. I'll take 1 minute. A final question, starting with Vishwanath.
Yes, sir.
It's a very simple question to all of you, sirs. Vishwanath, what is your positioning of this drug today in your practice?
In my practice, I would definitely try to use in most of the diabetics, especially people who have difficult to control blood pressure and volume. Most of the diabetic CKDs have definitely volume, so it will be for all. And with DAPA CKD trial coming in, probably I'll try to use in people with non-diabetes also.
Fantastic answer. Dr. Chandrakar.
Yes, absolutely on same grounds. Whenever there is systolic dysfunction, whether the patient has diabetes, definitely you use it. Even if you don't have diabetes, I would use it ahead of ARNI. That is where we stand today, and I have been using it. I'm very happy.
Fantastic. Shashank?
I feel these are wonder drugs. And they have not only uses beyond endocrinology, cardiology, nephrology, they have a pleiotropic impact. They will impact quality of life and the longevity of a life of a diabetic. See, normally every 6 seconds on planet Earth, one diabetic dies.
Absolutely.
And on an average, a diabetic lives 7 to 8 years less than a normal diabetic. So I personally feel with the advent of these drugs over the next decade, 2021 to 2030, I feel that gap will narrow and probably a diabetic will live as long, and this is my wish and prayer, as a normal human being because of these drugs. And number two, probably they might live longer. So this is a hope. And the biggest boon from this drug is that they will save us from the clutches of nephrologists and cardiologists and the expense which is incurred because of the disease burden. They are my best friends, but at the same time, the burden, financial and physical, and the complication burden is so huge that if we can prevent something, nothing like it.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I think, dear friends.
Sir, excuse me, sir. Sir, there are two more questions. Would you mind?
Yeah, please.
Two more. I have in the chat box.
I can see that. With SGLT2 inhibitors, plenty of glucose is lost. Proteins are gluconeogenesis substrates. Should we supplement with protein? I mean, with SGLT2, plenty of glucose is lost. Proteins are gluconeogenesis substrate. Should we supplement with proteins along with SGLT2 inhibitors?
Definitely in CKD, no, because as you all know, we hate too much of protein, CKD especially. So in fact, most of us, even if you don't tell the patient, patients become vegetarians when they develop CKD. Definitely no role of extra supplementation, especially in CKD. If there is no CKD, then there is no harm in giving extra protein. I'll leave.
I think we will end with this note, and I think what has been referred to just now by Chandrakar opens up Pandora's box. I'm just referring to the work by whom Sasank, Chandrakar, and Vishwanath knows, Ferranini. Ferranini from Italy for last many years is trying to find out. This is the insulin independent. Somebody has also asked the question that we have another insulin independent tool in our armamentarium, but exactly how it works, whether the cardiac benefits because of a diuretic effect, because of vascular effect, is still not known. This century, maybe this year, we'll see very accelerated research into the field, working out the exact mechanism of SGLT2 inhibitors, which is still a mystery. and we are going to discover this year possibly many aspects of it actually. With this note, a sincere thanks to all the delegates who have joined in thousands, me,
Yes, sir.
Shashank, Chandurkar, and Dr. Bishwanath. Thank you profusely. I thank all the panelists. I have my words fail to thank you. You are so eminent, so learned, and so great. I'll just say simply thank you. I enjoyed your company. Your answers were great and fabulous. And to the Microlab Knowledge Academy, to Manjula Madam, Siddharth, to Srinathji, and to Sesagiri, a big thank you for making